We've seen the empty shelves in grocery stores as panic buying shocks the distribution system. Now, this is an anomaly, according to the retail industry, because this system is designed to bring consumers the freshest product possible. But for those in the industries, how safe is it? Hello and welcome to the Unpublished Cafe. I'm Ed Hand. Once again, we're recording in a remote location and practicing physical distancing to protect us. When the COVID-19 pandemic arrived in Canada, it was met with long lineups, no 6-foot separation as we now see in stores, and lots of bare shelves. Those pictures were enough to fuel a panic buying frenzy. And that's somewhat dissipated with the retail and food industry soothing Canadians that there is ample supply for everyone. Coming up on the Unpublished Cafe, we take a look at the supply chain in Canada and see if there's any gaps in safety. While all but essential services are closed, which means most eateries and restaurants, some are trying to stay afloat by offering delivery and takeout, and that brings more questions about food safety. As mentioned, farmers will start planting shortly for the upcoming season. Traditionally, they hire tens of thousands of foreign workers through that season. We'll find out more about how the industry and the government plan to deal with that. There have been some conflicting messages recently as the retail sector maintains we do have enough capacity, while other groups worry that farmers and farming are not considered an essential service to keep providing food for Canadians. Now, joining us to discuss supply issues, I am pleased to be joined by Sylvain Charlebois, professor in the School of Public Administration, the School of Information Management, Resource and Environmental Studies, Rose School of Business, and the Department of Business and Social Sciences at Dalhousie University. And first on, Sylvain, do you feel the supply chain is robust enough in Canada to handle the demand?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I think the evidence is pretty strong. We have to appreciate the pressure our food distribution systems are under just because of this context. So first of all, you do have different expectations coming from consumers visiting grocery stores. They have to hire, clean, and making the place as safe as possible. Secondly, of course, there's this movement towards online shopping. In fact, I was just looking at a report yesterday coming from the U.S. comparing Canadians with the Americans, and since May 3rd, 18% more Canadians are shopping online for food. 18% is a lot. And so the grocers weren't necessarily ready for that push. And thirdly, and I think this is the most important thing that hasn't really been emphasized all that much since the beginning of the crisis, is that the food service industry is really non-existent now, other than takeout and delivery. And that's $90 billion worth of business. That's a lot of food. That's all being transferred from one sector to another, food retailing. So that pressure is real. And that's probably why a lot of people saw empty shelves. In-store merchandising has been an issue. But overall, I mean, there's plenty of food for Canadians moving forward.
What ensures food is safe for consumers going from farm to store shelf?
Well, of course, you have, from production, you have harvest. And frankly, over the last couple of years, Mother Nature has been good, other than perhaps some early frost issues and some flooding, particularly in the prairies. All in all, most commodities haven't been affected by major weather-related events. So on the production side, we do have a lot of commodities, and that's why prices have been flat. If you look at futures, they've been flat. In fact, actually, since COVID started, you can see that really most commodities have gone up a little bit, but not that much. So in processing, of course, we don't process enough in Canada, but there is a lot of processing going on in North America. And if we keep the border or borders open, then, of course, I don't think that that's going to be an issue, because we do have a very open economy. And in retail, there's lots of different retailers that invested heavily on logistics. We hear of the issues, we see pictures of problems at retail, but we don't necessarily see pictures of retailers doing very well. And you can tell that a lot of retailers have invested heavily on logistics in recent years, and it's paying off.
When we talk about food safety, I'm wondering about, the person who's got to go to the grocery store to pick up something. How do they know that that is safe, whether it be fresh produce or a bag of flour?
Well, they don't. That's the thing. The one thing that we're seeing in our numbers is that Canadians are realizing over the last couple of weeks that grocery stores are open systems. Everyone has access. Mm-hmm. You can walk in and out, touch anything and everything, and then leave. And that's really the problem that grocers are facing right now, and they need to manage perceived risk as much as possible. In terms of precautionary measures you can take as a consumer, of course, you continue to do what you've been doing all along. You wash your produce as much as you can and make sure that packaging is not contaminated. But you can see in stores self-serve counters, salad bars, packaging. It's all going to change. And of course, that's why you're seeing more plexiglass to protect employees. In the last 48 hours alone in this country, at least 6 grocery stores have to close due to the fact that one employee was diagnosed with COVID-19. So you can see that really the grocery business is under a lot of pressure, just given that it is a virus and it's spreading quite rapidly, and you want to make sure that people are safe.
So when you talk about those 6 grocery stores that had to close because an employee tested positive for COVID-19, does that mean they're closed for good, or do they just have to go through a very thorough cleaning and then they're able to reopen?
It's closures are temporary. I mean, you're looking at major stores that do sell millions of dollars every year of food. So what usually happens is that they just close the store and do a thorough cleaning for several hours and then reopen it, knowing that the virus can survive up to 24 hours on surfaces. Typically, a store would close for 24 hours and then it reopens again. What we're starting to see across the country are grocery stores just close to the public, and the public consumers are being served outside the store as if you're basically doing click and collect. And that's why I do think that click and collect and online delivery will become more and more popular, just because it will take a while. This situation is going to take, it's going to last 2-3 months, and that's long enough to create new habits.
Sylvain Charlebois is joining us on the Unpublished Cafe. He's professor at the Department of Business and Social Sciences at Dalhousie University, as we talk about food safety and the food supply chain in Canada. Now, you talked about some commodities being, prices being flat. What do you see in terms of food prices with Russia and Saudi Arabia in the midst of an oil price war?
Well, this is the one story that really hasn't attracted a whole lot of attention, but we're following very closely. If you actually needed your car, which most of us haven't, I mean, we basically are staying home, but if you needed gas, you realize that you're not paying much for gas anymore. And that's due to the fact that there is a serious oil price war going on, particularly between Saudi Arabia and Russia. The price of oil is depressed. I mean, it's gone down significantly, and that's why our currency has really been devaluated a little bit by 5 or 6 cents now compared to 2 weeks ago, and that's really has affected our importers' buying power. So we're going to have to pay more for certain food products, and we expect vegetables are going to be affected, and in the center of the store as well, the grocery part of the store is going to be affected, and that's where a lot of people made provisions for COVID.
Do you feel farmers and farm workers are an essential service?
I believe so, yes. Mm-hmm. If you actually look at the entire system, it all starts at Farmgate, and so any measures you can take in order to not burden farmers in their work, I think is a good thing. And frankly, some people are questioning the carbon tax applied to farmers, and honestly, I actually do think there's some good reasoning there. Maybe it is something that we need to rethink. The carbon tax is a divisive issue. Pricing carbon, I think, is something that is a must. But at Farmgate, farmers don't really have many options. And so that's why this carbon tax is a bit of a burden. And also, of course, the seasonal worker issue, which has come up in recent weeks. Hopefully, there'll be a plan for them to come here. It's great to make an exception, but physically they have to come here from the Caribbean, Mexico, and Guatemala. And right now, we don't see a plan, and that could compromise our ability to produce food here.
You know, we talked about getting some of our food from outside of Canada. A lot of it's coming from the U.S., and we know right now that the pandemic is ripping right through that country. What ensures that American food is safe to cross the border coming into Canada?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with protocols, and frankly, if you look at protocols between Canada and the U.S., they're very similar. My concern is related to how Americans will manage fear. They don't have a great track record when dealing with fear. And this pandemic is affecting Americans right now, and will affect America severely over the next 2-3 weeks, given how they've been managing this crisis. Numbers are going way up, and they'll continue to increase. And so I'm a little bit concerned about how the White House and different states will manage this outbreak moving forward. Some measures could disrupt the supply chain, which really could impact our access to food coming from the U.S. But right now, I haven't seen anything that would be concerning, other than BC's decision to take over the authority of supply chains. And that's a different issue. It's not going to affect people out east, but if, say, Ontario, Quebec, and other provinces and some states would decide to do the same as what BC did last week, we could have some issues.
Sylvain, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Sylvain Charlebois is a professor in the School of Public Administration, the School of Information Management, School for Resource and Environmental Studies, the Rose School of Business, and the Department of Business and Social Sciences at Dalhousie University. While some will opt for fewer grocery store runs to avoid COVID-19 in the crowds, we have seen many restaurants, eateries, and bars that cannot open up to serve you, well, they're beefing up their takeout and delivery game. Lawrence Goodridge is the Lung Family Professor in Food Safety, the Canadian Research Institute for Food Safety, and the Department of Food Science at the University of Guelph, and he joins us today. And Lawrence, first off, do you recommend Canadians order out or get delivery from restaurants at this time?
Yes, I think that is one of the recommendations and best practices in order to reduce interactions with people and to follow the physical distancing guidelines that have been put forth.
This is a little bit more than just eateries trying to cut their losses right now. This is becoming a key lifeline, is it not?
Yes, for example, with the increased guidelines for self-isolation for people returning from international travel, which going right home from the airport, we see increased statements like that. Don't stop at the grocery store. If people don't have food in their house, they have to eat. So ordering food, whether that's delivered to the house or whether the person goes to the restaurant drive-through or even into the restaurant for takeout purposes, we should reduce any risk of contracting the disease.
Is curbside or pickup or delivery better from your perspective?
So there's no real data to suggest that either one is better. I think the risk of contracting or spreading COVID-19 remains low, regardless of which mode is used, delivery or going to get the food. Some food delivery companies have adopted best practices to reduce physical interaction, where, for example, they will place the food on the porch and ring the doorbell, and then retreat, and then the person can open the door and get the food without even coming anywhere near the delivery driver. So all of these steps are good and will further reduce any risk that one can get the disease.
How can Canadians ensure their meal is safe, whether they're getting delivery or pickup or takeout?
So there's currently no evidence that COVID-19 can be contracted from food. Certainly, there's been, in the last few days, there's been several studies. For example, some studies showing that the virus can be shed in feces, and so there was some concern that might mean that if people don't wash their hands, for example, they could spread it. They could contract it through what's called the fecal-oral route. Then there are other studies that showed that the virus can survive on various surfaces like cardboard for 24 hours and plastic for 2 to 3 days. So that led to concern that, since those materials are often used in food containers, especially like foods that are takeout, that somebody, could potentially get the disease from food. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency and the Food and Drug Administration in the U.S. and the European Food Safety Authority have all released statements saying that there is no evidence that they have seen of foodborne transmission. And really, what it comes down to is good hand hygiene. So if people continually wash their hands and don't try not to touch their face. I know it's difficult. We tend to do that a lot, but if we try to reduce contact with our face and wash our hands often, then any risk of contracting it, the disease COVID-19, through consumption of food or touching food containers or anything like that is greatly reduced.
We hear so much about food security in Canada, even before COVID-19. We hear about food wastelands and such. And does this kind of show what we're seeing now with restaurants having to sort of rejig and go take out delivery, that the industry is really part of that food security chain?
I think so. I think I don't know the numbers, but it's obvious to me that a large number of Canadians eat in restaurants and takeout. I certainly know my family does. I think that what may happen is that after this pandemic, how we do that, how we eat in those establishments or obtain food from those establishments, will likely be modified. So I would expect to see increasing numbers of people using delivery services, which we've seen already, before the disease began. But I think that trend is going to continue.
Obviously the entertainment industry, retail, restaurants, eateries, bars, that kind of a thing. It's a new world for them right now. What do you think it's going to look like in, say, 6 months to a year? It's a hard question. I can't really answer that. I mean, I think it will depend on where we are here in Canada and the rest of the world. So by that, what I mean is, will we still be sheltering in place? Will we still be under, lockdown? I think answering that question first will be the prelude to answering, what happens to the restaurant industry. I think there's general consensus that there will be a number of restaurants that unfortunately will go out of business because they just can't withstand the close. I don't know. I think generally speaking, it will take a very innovative approaches by the restaurant industry, like collective approaches, to minimize any losses
will come from this pandemic.
Lawrence, I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Lawrence Goodridge is the Lund Family Professor in Food Safety, Canadian Research Institute for Food Safety, and the Department of Food Science at the University of Guelph. Canada's agriculture sector has been on edge due to the pandemic and its ability to keep Canadians fed. To find out more about the safety of our food, I'm pleased to be joined by Jeff Hall, food safety expert with the Canadian Produce Marketing Association. And Jeff, how has the association adapted to this pandemic by ensuring the food supply is safe?
Well, good morning, Ed, and thanks for giving us an opportunity to talk about this topic. The associations have been working very closely with both the federal and provincial governments to ensure that the information that the government is gathering with respect to the pandemic can be clearly and simply distributed out to our membership. The Canadian Produce Marketing Association has about 850 members across the country and down in the U.S. So it's important, given the nature of our business and the amount of product that moves back and forth across the borders, to be in tune with both what the federal, provincial, as well as the federal government in the U.S. is doing. We also work very, very closely with our industry partners and association partners, both here in Canada and the U.S. So in Canada, that would be groups like the Retail Council of Canada, the Canadian Horticultural Council, as well as a number of others, to make sure that we are all on the same page when it comes to dealing with this particular crisis and a number of other ones that have come up in the past.
What safeguards are in place for Canadians when they're dealing with packaging for food?
So one of the things about the industry, the fresh fruit and produce, is for a long time now we have had processes in place to try to minimize the risk when it comes to food safety. So programs like the Canada Gap program, which is a food safety program, part of the Global Food Safety Initiative suite of programs that are out there. It's a globally recognized program, which a large number, if not almost all, of the producers across Canada use to ensure that the products they're producing are being done at the lowest risk possible. When it comes to packaged product, you're now moving into the world of the minimally processed. So things like, your baby carrots or your bagged salads, and those sites have even further or even more, I should say, programs in place, because you have brought in that dynamic of manufacturing as well. So there are programs in place to ensure that all the packaged products are being produced, the safest way possible, once again, to minimize risk.
Now, for fresh produce, how do Canadians know it's safe? When you look at people going to the grocery store and, you've got a bin of apples or a bin of whatever, how many times have we seen people grabbing a few of them before they take what they want?
Yeah, and obviously we would discourage consumers from kind of sampling as they go, sort of thing. But the purchase of product, especially fresh fruits and vegetables, can be a very tactile experience. Not something we suggest, but we all know that happens. With respect to the current issue with the COVID-19 virus. All of the government health associations, be that the Public Health Agency of Canada, or the Center for Disease Control in the U.S., they've all put out messaging that says this is not a foodborne illness. This virus will only remain viable for very short spans of time on surfaces. So the risk of it being transferred from a food product to somebody's hands and then to be consumed is extremely, extremely low. That being said, all produce that's purchased when you're buying it from bulk, for example, if you look at a bin of whatever it is, when a consumer gets it home, we suggest that they follow the Canadian government's recommendations of, washing those fresh fruit and vegetables just under cold running water, just to make sure that if anything is on there, that it's been rinsed off. And then you should be extremely confident in the safety of the product. Fresh fruits and vegetables are an important nutritious part of our diets, and they provide us with, all of the fruits and all of the vitamins and minerals that we need. So it's important for consumers to continue to eat those, especially during times like this, where our immune systems, could use a little boost maybe, and having those nutrients coming into us is very important.
Physical distancing is the new norm, and when it comes to food processing and packaging, how does the industry adapt when these people work in such close quarters?
Yeah, so once again, this is something that as associations we've been talking with the government about, and it really comes down to the manufacturers understanding their process, which they all do, of course, and then modifying it as they need to try and respect, whenever possible, those social distancing norms. And they do that through a variety of methods, whether it's, changing how the shifts work in a plant, avoiding that, one shift is coming in while another shift is coming out, sort of thing, reducing the interaction, during break times and at lunch, for example, and make sure people are respecting that. And of course, all of those manufacturing sites also have excellent relationships with their chemical providers. So the folks that provide them with their cleaners and their sanitizers, and they have been in constant contact to make sure that products are going to be available to them, because I know things are starting to get a little tight. But here in Canada, I think we are in a better state than in some places in the U.S. right now. But it is something that we want to make sure that's being monitored, and so companies have access to those cleaners and sanitizers. And also, that's an excellent discussion, because those sanitizing and chemical companies are talking to various manufacturers, and there is a real sense of sharing best practices when it comes to a situation like this. So there is a lot of communication and trying to do industry best to reduce that social contact as much as possible.
Jeff Hall is a food safety expert with the Canadian Produce Marketing Association. And Jeff, temporary foreign workers, they are key to the industry. Now, the government is trying to ensure they can get into Canada, but if they can't, what's the impact on the industry?
So that particular issue was brought up almost immediately by the industry once it looks like the government might be changing the requirements for getting into the country, given the COVID-19 crisis. So the industry has been working very closely with the government. Specifically groups like the Canadian Horticultural Council, the Canadian Produce Marketing Association, the Ontario Fruit and Vegetable Growers, and a number of others realize the impact this would have on the industry. Happy to say that they've come to a resolution to it, and a program that will allow those workers, many of whom have been coming here to do work every summer for decades in some cases. So a deal has been reached to allow that workforce to get in. The issue, if they don't get in, is that there's a number of operations that simply would not be able to operate without that workforce coming in. A lot of these jobs are, they're very difficult jobs, and they're outdoor. And, you need a certain mindset to do it. And we're very lucky to be able to tap into that resource of the temporary workers, who in many cases have become family to the farms and whatnot they work with. So we're glad to see that a program has been put in place that will allow those workers to come into Canada and continue doing the job and helping us to get fresh fruits and vegetables out to the Canadian public.
Jeff, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Jeff Hall is a food safety expert with the Canadian Produce Marketing Association. Now you've heard from the experts when it comes to food safety in Canada. It's time for you to weigh in on our Unpublished.vote question. How confident are you in Canada's food supply chains? Very confident, somewhat confident, not very confident, or unsure. You can log on and vote right now at Unpublished.vote. We'll look at the results in an upcoming episode. I want to thank Professor Sylvain Charlebois from Dalhousie University, Lawrence Goodridge of the University of Guelph, and Jeff Hall of the Canadian Produce Marketing Association. And I want to thank you for listening to the Unpublished Cafe. Stay safe. I'm Ed Hand.